get us started. Welcome, everyone. It's the beginning of a beautiful academic year, and I'm so happy to see so many folks here today joining us. This is the first pit stop of the year. We have 6 planned that are system-wide, and then depending on what campus you're on, you might also have some in-person, face-to-face ones that follow up. These sessions are hosted by the Transformational Change Initiative, which is in the office of the provost and the executive vice president. I'm Erica. I'm the director of the TCI. And today I'm really excited about the panel that I've been able to get together for you today. As you all know, we are in unprecedented times in our classrooms with the use of generative artificial intelligence. And if you're like me, you're scratching your head, not really sure exactly how you might use it, what you need to be aware of, and just really how it's going to impact what happens in the classroom for both myself and for students. So I invited 3 panelists today, and all who have different perspectives and ideas around generative AI in the classroom. So first, I'd like to introduce Lisa Carloye. She is in the School of Biological Sciences, and she's also a member of the WSU Teaching Academy. And she's volunteered to share her own experiences in her classroom and how she's used it. We also have with us Harrison Hughes, who's from the ASCC, and he's a career coach and academic advisor. And so he's going to share with you how he's used AI as a tool when working with students. And I really think that for those of us who are in a traditional classroom, we will see how we can translate some of Harrison's ideas into our teaching. But many of us also have advising roles. So I'm hoping that this will support those of you who have that. And then finally, we have Karen Metzner, who's Associate Dean of Students and the Director for the Center for Community Standards. And Karen and I worked collaboratively on a much larger task force over the summer to try and provide some guidance for WSU faculty, students, and staff related to AI. So I've invited her here to answer the questions I know that are going to come up that I'm not so good at answering. Before we get started, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for other upcoming events that you can take advantage of. We have another pit stop that will be October 4th, and this one is being hosted in collaboration with the Teaching Academy. Teresa Jordan and Kathy Cohen developed a peer teaching observation and co-mentoring program, and the TCI has adopted it and provided funding for a pilot to scale it up. So we want them to share what the program's about and how you can take advantage of it to improve your teaching. Of course, we have our second annual TeachX WSU, which will be system-wide. You can participate via Zoom or in person. Registration is not yet live, but it's so close to being live. And you'll want to register by September 30th to take advantage of that. And then finally, I have Lisa Guerrero, who's Vice Chancellor in Pullman for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she will be giving a presentation about educational equity, how achieving this in our classrooms, it's a journey and it's not a destination. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to get our panel going. I think since I had it in alphabetical order, I was thinking, but so Lisa, would you mind starting us off and sharing what you've got going in your classroom? So the way the panel will work is I'll have each of our panelists kind of give a brief overview of their perspective, and then we'll open the floor to question and answers, Q&A. So Lisa, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Erica. And hi, everybody. So a quick disclaimer here. So I actually have not implemented any of the ideas that I wanted to share with you today. I spent the summer thinking really hard about what I was going to do with this new brave new world that we're in with generative AI, where students don't actually have to write their own assignments or, do their own work because it does a nice job for them. And so I really was trying to think about like what is the point of our writing assignments, right? So I really wanted to think about, well, what are my learning goals that I have embedded in these assignments that I've created for my students over the years? And ultimately, while I think, just the mechanics of writing are super important, you have to know how to write in order to communicate effectively. I thought, well, the fact that writing and thinking are iterative and so closely linked together, um, some of my key learning goals really are about thinking. And so if students kind of offboard the task of writing to ChatGPT, for example, then what are they missing? And I think one of the key things they're missing is the opportunity to think and to kind of develop their own thoughts and, kind of go back and forth with that process that happens when you're writing. And so then my next thought was, well, what are the ways to try to encourage students to do their own work? Like, how can we encourage students to engage with the writing that we assign them? Because I think one of the problems with writing for student perspective is that it's hard, and so if it's hard and if it's daunting, then I think they're a little more likely to be looking for off ramps or for support and help, and then that might derail into actually you know, using a tool inappropriately to accomplish their writing. And so I have a college student, a child, and so I asked him, like, what would make it easier? And he suggested breaking down the assignments into smaller, more digestible chunks rather than write a paper on. And I thought that was a really good idea. And I've actually read, other papers that have been published that talk about that and how if you can break down the writing assignments and make each one seem less daunting, that might be a way to help students engage and not feel discouraged or like they are unable to accomplish the assignment from the get-go and be willing to give it a try. So that was one thing that I've done is break my assignments down into kind of the key components that are part of how you would go about writing a paper. And so, for example, in my Biology 101 class, I have the students write a position paper about how we should and should not use CRISPR-Cas9, a gene editing tool. And, um, and since it's a position paper, I wanted to kind of guide them through what's the biology behind, how does it work? So I broke that as a component. Let's tackle the biology piece of it. Um, what are people saying? Like, what are the pluses and minuses, the benefits and concerns? And so I made that into an assignment. And then, what is a position statement anyway? Right? So I made that into an assignment, write a position statement. And then starting, okay, so what's the structure of a paper? And so I worked with some colleagues in the writing center and ended up making a storyboard assignment. So let's storyboard this, right? So here's our opening paragraph. Here's your position statement. Here's the body of the paper. Here's the conclusion. Here's the citation, bibliography. And trying to break down, you can do each one of these sections and then build it up into a full-blown paper. So that was one thing. It's like, let's try to give students, let's lower the risk factor for them so that they're more likely to engage. So another thing that I had found online with other people saying is that one way to encourage students to do their own work is to have build into the assignment some way of capturing their own experiences or their own opinions or data that they've collected themselves so that it has a personal aspect to it that can't be replicated by ChatGPT. And so that's another component of that position statement is it's their opinion, right? And so so I think that's another good idea, which I'm trying to implement. For my majors biology class, Biology 106, we have traditionally had them do an experiment and gather data and do some statistics and then write up a formal scientific paper. And so it's not appropriate to have a personal opinion in there or personal experience. It's a very different kind of a writing assignment. And but it's also pretty daunting, I think, because introductory students are not used to writing in that third person formal scientific format. And so what we're going to try this year is starting out with a visual component. And so their first crack at trying to communicate the results in a scientific framework is to make an infographic. And an infographic is much more visual with some words, but it's mostly, conveying ideas through images. And so I built a whole lab where they're going to take their data, take their experimental design, and turn it into an infographic, and with guidance on what that means and how to do it. But of course, in order to communicate visually, they're going to talk about, what's the research question, and how did they go about designing their experiment, and what do their plans look like, and what data did they get, and what does it mean? So basically, a visual scientific paper. And then the bridge piece is what I'm calling an expanded infographic, where I want them to actually take pictures of just this section, right? Take a picture of just this part of your infographic that would be your introduction. Stick it in this, this text box, and then expand the writing. So you're giving me 3, 4, or 5 sentences about what that graphic is showing you. What was your introduction? And then take a picture of your materials and methods, and then write it up into sections. And so it's kind of in this grid with a picture and then expanded words. And then ultimately they can just kind of copy and paste their chunked writing, and then expand it, flesh it out, make some connections, and turn it into a scientific paper. And then that would be their draft, and then we'll do our traditional feedback and improvement of the paper, and turn in their final version of their paper. So I'm really curious to see how that one turns out. The motivation is that ChatGPT and others are not so good with images, but I also know that's changing. And I guess with DALL-E, it actually is an image generator. So potentially, if they're going to pay for some kind of a AI platform, they might be able to have it done by AI instead. But I think this is a good bridge, and we'll see. So I'm just really curious about that. And so yeah, so I just wanted to share some of my ideas, and I guess we'll do questions kind of at the end, right, Erica? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to hear people give some feedback and ask questions about those ideas. Harrison, how about you? Would you like to share what you've been doing with your students?
Sure. So I'll just do a little bit of an introduction for myself, just for perspective. As a career coach, I talk to people about what they might be doing in the future. It's a lot of decision making and goal setting processes and ideas. So there's a lot of just idea generation, a lot of thinking about things that they may have not thought about before, and just encouraging them to try a new thing, consider a new angle. So I do a lot of just talking to people, trying to reduce anxiety and just making them feel more comfortable expressing themselves in those ways, and then trying to provide resources that will be objective and helpful for them, so that they can look at what would be the implication if I wanted to pursue this type of thing. What are the earnings? How many people currently work in it? There's a lot of boring things that go into it. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis with pretty much anyone who walks through the door, undergraduates, graduate students, all disciplines. For me, and what I think it's capable of, ChatGPT and generative AIs like this, it's really, really interesting. I'm a geriatric millennial, which is a term I love. I feel like we're finally getting some respect. So the millennials. So I remember what it was like, before computers were widespread, before we had Google that would, essentially answer any question for us if we type into it. And this moment feels similar to that type of moment, where we just have a tool that's going to be so useful and has so many potential applications, that it is just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't consider what could be done with it, what angles we might be able to pursue with it. So when I'm working with people, I don't try to use ChatGPT as like a first resource. Honestly, it's like a third, fourth, fifth line type of resource, and I look for signs that they're going to be receptive to it before I even bring it up. Because in my experience, the students who I've asked about it, I might only have maybe a quarter to a third who are willing to reveal to me that they use ChatGPT or something like it. And, you know, there could be a couple different factors in there. Maybe some of them are like, well, you work for the university. I don't know if I want to talk about this, you know, tool that has some academic integrity connotations behind it that's still not particularly clear. And of those third to quarter of them who say that they have heard of it, have tried it out, it's a smaller percentage that say they use it regularly, and it's pretty much just changed the way that they interact with the world. Like they do different tasks in it. They have made themselves more efficient for certain things, or they're asking for advice in their own writing and looking for feedback from those resources. So it's definitely not something that I'm leading off with. It's not something that I'm pushing, but it's definitely something that I want to be able to encourage them to take a look at, to consider, because it is so immediate. It will immediately tell you information, cheerfully lie to your face. And there's a lot of risk associated with that. But the practice of using these tools to try out things, to see what they do, ultimately, I think that's going to make them prepared for what is likely to come, what is probably going to be on the horizon. So I do feel I have a little bit of a responsibility to just encourage them to try it out. So some of the things that I might recommend, some of the things that I've tried out and I feel that it's not particularly bad at immediately, is maybe generating a list of keywords that are particularly relevant to a specific industry or a specific job. And then it'll rattle off quickly all sorts of potential skill sets, things that students may not realize that they could be preparing themselves with before graduations. They're entering into those interviews a little bit more prepared. So pretty good at that. But if you're not in that industry, and I'm not in most of their industries, in most of the things that they want to do, so I'm not a specialist. I can't pick out the errors. And that's the real danger there, is that it will generate a lot of ideas. We can't really tell the value of those ideas without expert opinion. And I think that's where all of you come in, is that you're experts on your subjects. You can experiment, you can try out different things and see where it seems to react all right, where it seems to give okay information, and where maybe it's not as effective. And then be the voice of reason, express caution to the students in the things that you think aren't going to work particularly well. And, you know, maybe in the future, there'll be some resources that are actually designed to help educators. Google is working on one, I think it's called Notebook LM, where you train the data set. So you load in your articles that you want the students to know about, the textbooks which you've licensed legally, and all of those good things, and you've trained the AI to be more helpful than the general AI, the big AI, because it already knows all the subject matter in that database. So the students will find it more applicable and more immediately helpful than the general ones. So you can kind of control how much danger there is, and how accurate it's likely to be. I've tried to opt in for it. I've asked for beta access, but they haven't said yes to me yet. Still a brand new tool, still in development. So that's my take on it. You know, I'll ask it, what are keywords? What are questions I might get asked in interviews? And I do find that it's pretty good at breaking down simple tasks or tasks that don't require a lot of expertise into component parts that are easy to follow through with. So I've asked it to write emails for me where I'm going to ask for people to cover hours at our front desk in the ASCC. And then I plug in some times and I say, create me a fillable grid so people can volunteer for these times. That's something I would be able to do, but I wouldn't be able to do it as fast as ChatGPT. And I know my coworkers, I know the tone that they're expecting from me, so I'm going to edit it. I'm not going to just drop it right in, but it does take the labor out of me going, 1, do this, 2, do this, 3, do this, and then step 17, you're done. It breaks it down, operationalizes that pretty quickly. Feel like I've been talking a long time, so I'm gonna end it there for now.
Thanks, Harrison. Karen, do you want to give us some insights from your office?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I appreciate you joining in this conversation. My name is Karen Metzner, and I serve as one of our Associate Dean of Students and Director for the Center for Community Standards. My office is a system office, and so regardless of your campus location, we do address academic integrity and conduct violations across the WSU system. Just really briefly, my elevator speech about my office is our primary goal, first and foremost, is to support students, as many of our goals are. We also make sure that our students have access to their rights and responsibilities as they navigate the community standards process. And we also hold students accountable for behavior that conflicts with our community expectations. And it really is a balance of those 3 areas. I'm sure most of you were thinking of the third one when you heard the conduct person was coming. We get that a lot. We try not to take it personally, but we are part of the supportive tool and the safety net and the resources that our students do have access to. As a student here. So generative AI and academic integrity is a new ball of worms, or bucket of worms, I guess, for the institution and for lots of institutions. We do have policies already in place for academic integrity, and generative AI and the use of generative AI can fall in those policies. And so we didn't have to emergency amend our rules to include generative AI because it falls under some of the other ways that we've defined it, such as unauthorized sources or plagiarism, or potentially under the academic expectations of the class. So if you, as an instructor, you get to decide what the use of AI looks like in your class, and it's really important to communicate that in a clear way to your students, but you get that autonomy to decide. So if you want to allow it, you can. If you want to not allow it, you also have that right. When we're talking about academic integrity, everything artificial intelligence is new and a little tricky. And so I wish I could sit in front of you today and say, here's the solution, just add water and stir and you'll be fine. But we really just don't have access to that functionality yet, because generative AI has kind of changed the way we think about writing and detecting concerns about writing. So within our process, just the 30,000 foot view, the first thing for a faculty member, if you have concern about an academic integrity violation, is to identify that concern, and then reach out to the student and let them know that you have a concern. We ask that you try to meet with the student, offer to meet. If the student declines or doesn't come, you're not required to meet with them before moving forward. But we found that particularly in this gray area of artificial intelligence, having that conversation face-to-face or face-to-face is really important to have the student have the opportunity to express what happened from their perspective. Ultimately, after that conversation, you as the faculty member has to determine if it's more likely than not that the violation occurred, and if so, report it to our office. And that's where things with artificial intelligence get really tricky. How do we determine if it occurred or not? There is an artificial intelligence detector that's built into Turnitin that you all have access to. That detector tool is a tool to potentially flag concerning text. That being said, there are institutions across the nation that are disabling the Turnitin AI detector because we know that it has false positives. We know there's some research out of Stanford that talks about bias against non-native English speakers in AI detection software because of syntax and the way that we build sentences. it is a tool and a piece of evidence, but in our office, when we're looking at what's more likely than not happened, some people say 50 and a feather, some people say 51%. Is it more likely than not that the student violated the course expectations? When we have a tool like the AI detection software, we know that there's these really pretty significant limitations on it. A flag of AI, that from the Turnitin tool, that text was AI generated, may not in and of itself reach the threshold of more likely than not because of these limitations of the detection tools. And that's where, when, for plagiarism detection, you would get a report, it would say it's 78% plagiarized, here are the sources, here's the sections that are, match. That evidence looks different, right? Because we can say, this section matches this section, this is where it came from, this is not that student's work. The same thing doesn't really exist in artificial intelligence generated work, and part of that is how we end up with those false positives. So if you are using that as a tool, maybe consider it a yellow flag or an orange flag and not a red flag. Maybe that identifies a paper that you have some questions or concerns about, and that invites the conversation with the student to say, hey, tell me what's going on here and what's happening. Some of the things that, of course, there's artificial intelligence software recommendation tools for faculty, tools for students, tools for everyone on the internet now. There's a billion articles out there. A lot of the things that the recommendations to students are to be able to show your progress. Lisa, you talked about how writing is iterative. If you can show drafts, if you can show progress, if you can show this is where I started and this is how I ended, that's a protective factor for the student. So if they are accused of an academic integrity violation, they can say, I see that this was 45% generated by AI, but let me show you my progress, and let me show you my drafts, and let me show you how I got there. That same evidence that's protective for them also can be evidence for you if you want to refer someone. And so if you're referring someone and you're saying, hey, they were supposed to break this down into sections and do it over time, and this doesn't actually do that. This is all generated or appears to be generated at once, and there's also false citations in it or other things. Those are additional pieces of evidence, but it requires more evaluation of the content and more careful articulation of what your concerns are, because just that report is difficult to get to that 51% in and of itself unless you can bring in more information from other spaces. The other thing sort of related to that is, if a student appeals your decision, the Academic Integrity Hearing Board is going to look at, did the violation occur? And was the academic consequence in line with the course syllabus? So if the course syllabus said you could fail the class and you failed the class, you're in alignment. If the course syllabus said you'd only fail the assignment and as a faculty member you fail someone for the course, then that's not in alignment. The other big question is, did the violation occur? And in order to make that determination, the board is going to look at what evidence does the faculty member have that this content was generated by AI, and what are the pieces that support that claim or that accusation. So with that, establishing clear expectations is really important, because if you are saying this was generated by AI, the evidence that it was generated by AI, we know is going to be somewhat difficult. But if we also have to reach the threshold of, well, what were the course expectations around the use of AI, because those haven't been clearly communicated, it's just another barrier in being able to potentially hold students accountable for behavior that doesn't meet our policies. There isn't a solution that's going to be a cure-all. And I think the intentionality in course assignment and really being willing to have those conversations to say, hey, like, this writing sounds really different than this other writing. Tell me what's going on here. Those are some of the pathways that we have forward that may not be, totally, the stick versus carrot metaphor, right? Like they're not totally on the stick end, but they're going to be somewhere in the middle because we have to sort this out. And it isn't going to be super clean one way or the other, not in the foreseeable future, in my opinion. So that's a little bit about my office, some of the challenges, and the process exists. It's just figuring out kind of how it applies to this new technology, and wading through what does evidence look like for an artificial intelligence generated paper or assignment.
Wow, lots of ideas and information here. And I know you all came with different reasons. So I think right now we'll just open it up for some Q&A for our panelists. You can raise your hand if you want. You can put a question into chat if you'd like. Hillary.
Yeah, I just got home from teaching and I'm only warning you because my cat is psychotically screaming in the background, so just ignore him. I'm curious whether, as an instructor, I should be thinking about whether or not my exams can still be open book and untimed. So I tried to implement the Universal Learning Design college reading book from last year, and I have like a mixture of multiple choice, short answer, long answer. But I basically like said, I'll make this open book and untimed. It's up for 48 hours. Do your best. And then I did try to run the questions through ChatGPT and make it harder for it to answer. But I decided to continue to let students do it from home, kind of take breaks, have the whole 48-hour period. But questions I've heard in my department are sort of like, can we trust students? Does everything now need to be in person? Does it need to be timed? So I guess I'm really struggling with that as a new faculty member. Like, am I doing something wrong? Like, is there a right answer? How does ChatGPT affect that sort of universal learning design principle?
Anybody want to jump in there first? And it can also be folks that are in the audience that have been thinking about this. I know some of you have been thinking carefully about these same questions.
Well, I guess I'll pop in. I think that the experimentation, the going in and using the tool, I think that was really, really smart. Just seeing what does it do in those situations, because now you're able to say, am I okay with this? Will it significantly affect the learning outcomes of the course? In terms of potential other ways that you could go, you might be able to just wade right in. ChatGPT specifically has, maybe not these other tools, I haven't tried it with them, has a way to share the chats. You can send people the questions that you've asked and see the way that ChatGPT responded. So it could be possible to assume everyone's using it or force everyone to use it. I don't know if that's the greatest answer, and require that they send you their process, their chat, so you can see how did they get to the answer, because you have to ask the right question to get the right answer in ChatGPT. I've asked a lot of wrong questions in ChatGPT and been unimpressed with the results.
Hillary, I know that over the summer when we were working on the task force, one of the messages that came out of that group was that there is no single right answer for this. So much like in any other case in our classroom, we have the freedom to achieve the learning outcomes that we have for our students in whatever way works for us as an instructor, right? So our classroom is still under our purview and under our control. And so our recommendation there was really to think about what are the learning outcomes that you want to achieve with your students, and how do they demonstrate that they've achieved that? And in starting with the learning outcomes, it sometimes gets a little bit easier to determine am I going to have to do something in class with them? And if so, what is that going to look like now, as opposed to something that they can take home? During Elevate, Dee Posey and Kate Watts gave some really nice advice as well, which was, you know, you can be very clear that if they're having a take-home exam and you want them to demonstrate some skills there, they need to be skills that ChatGPT can't mimic, right? So those are the sorts of skills you would have them do there. But you can also invite them to use the technology, like Karen, you know, like some of the suggestions here. So yeah, you have this exam, start here, this is what you're going to get, but then you need to disclose that you used the AI and how you used it, and leave a paper trail for that. So I just think for a lot of our decisions about what we're doing in our classroom, it really starts with, what is that learning outcome? And if it's something that ChatGPT can do, then we can't be asking students to do that sort of thing outside of class, because then there really is no way to know if it was them or not.
Yeah, I might chime in. I totally agree. I think that the question is, what are the learning outcomes or learning goals, and whether or not it can be achieved. And I think Anne in the chat made a comment that I think we can assume that students will be using it more and more. And I think that's right. And I think from the student side, one of the big challenges is that all of their professors are going to have different takes on, you know, is using it cheating? Is using it required? Is it a good tool to get you started? And so I think, you know, we're all as faculty kind of in our own little silos and have our own ideas about what's right and wrong and what the good use is, and, you know, when it's cheating. And we may not be aware of what other faculty are saying about it, and have to understand that students might be getting really mixed messages. So I think, you know, that's you know, one thing is that we can't assume that students know that it's cheating if we think it's cheating. And that's why it's really important to be clear about what, you know, kind of use is okay and what kind of use is not. I have found it hard to articulate that because I don't know yet. You know, I need to kind of go through an experience and find out, oh, I guess that wasn't really okay. Or, oh, yeah, what the heck, you know, that was fine. So I think we're all kind of learning and stumbling through this together, us and the students and, you know, faculty. I would just pop out one thing that you know, from my reading this summer, they said if you want to um, kind of help students have to do a little more of their own thinking and not just offboard it to ChatGPT, if you require that their part of their answer is limited to specific things that you've talked about in class, that's one way to you know, be able to say, well, you've got a good answer here, but you completely missed everything that we talked about in class. So, you know, not full credit or something like that. So that's just a tip I saw.
Are there questions or comments or examples of how you're using this in your own classroom?
So
Go
Eric,
for it, Cliff.
oh, sorry, Cliff. I was going to throw in one thing I didn't mention. So I did want to try to create an assignment where I have them use it deliberately. And so what I'm going to have my Biology 101 non-majors, CRISPR-Cas9 position paper people do is come to class with a list of bullets of what their reasons are for the position that they're taking, and then put those reasons into ChatGPT and ask it to generate the counter arguments, and then have them respond to those arguments. And so I guess the downside to that is that they can just turn around and say, okay, ChatGPT, what are the counter arguments? Right? So they don't have to do any engagement with that, but I kind of think they will. I think they'll be curious to see what the counter arguments are and then kind of respond to that. So I'm going to give that a try as a way to actually ask them to use the technology in a deliberative way and see what happens.
So Cliff, do you want to pop in there? And then we have a question in the Q&A that I'm actually gonna see if Karen wants to take a stab at it. Cliff?
Sure. So I teach a history course, upper division history course, and they do some shorter writing assignments in addition to a research project. And in those shorter writing assignments, for at least one of them, they're reading a fairly well-known book that, you know, has a lot of information out there on it. So I was a little worried this summer when designing the course that they would simply ChatGPT the prompt. And so I put the prompt into ChatGPT, and, you know, it was kind of bland, but fairly accurate. So what I decided to have students do instead is imagine that they're being asked, that they're working at a magazine that writes about history and politics, and they need to, their editor has come to them after having to let go some of the previous writers for their less than effective writing skills, right? So they're actually, students are going to work with the ChatGPT generated piece of writing and make improvements to it, suggest improvements to it. They don't actually have to edit it, but I've given them a set of prompts like, what are, you know, identify 3 issues with it, and then how would you address them? I'm doing that in their first writing assignment so that when they go to the second one, they've thought about the fact that ChatGPT can generate some writing, but it's not always the most effective kind of writing in the genres and things that they're being asked to write in, and that they're thinking about writing as a process and how you would critique and make improvements to writing, and not just go with the first draft that you either create yourself or that you have ChatGPT generate for you. So we'll see how it goes. Haven't done it before.
Karen, I pasted the question that we got in the Q&A. Do you want to try and take a stab at that one?
Yeah, that's a tough one for lots of reasons, because I don't necessarily know everything that happened with that particular student. I think that we know that there is some research to suggest that English as a second language or non-native English speakers are more likely to get flagged by AI generative software. In this, the language you used is plagiarized. I'm assuming that the faculty member indicated that they plagiarized by using generative AI. We see the word plagiarize get used in a lot of different ways in the reports that my office receives. I think the challenge about this and something that is tough is that when a faculty member reports to my office, we facilitate the record keeping and appeals, but don't actually make decisions on whether we think that is a viable case or not. And so in this particular circumstance, if I'm filling in some gaps and I don't know the details at all, if the faculty member reported the student, and they, 7 years ago. Okay, so it was a bit ago. Some of our processes have changed since then, but if the student is reported to our office, then we have to facilitate the process. And if the student doesn't initiate the appeal, then it's going to go through the process, and that faculty decision becomes the final outcome. So if you're working with a student and maybe it's for a different course and they say that they were alleged to have violated and they disagree, have them utilize the appeal process. That's what it's there for. That can be really overwhelming. And there's also cultural implications of expressing disagreement with an authority figure, depending on where the student is from and what their cultural background is. But that appeals process, if the student didn't plagiarize, then that's the option they have to have that decision reviewed. As a faculty member, I don't teach, but I also am a conduct officer, so I make decisions that can sometimes get appealed. I love that there's an appeal process, because the cases that are easier is when you look at the evidence, and the evidence is, there's so much evidence. Those ones are easy, right? But when you get closer to that 50% range, you have to grapple with them a lot more to decide where does the weight of the evidence lie. And so if you're a faculty member and you're sitting there kind of weighing the scales, and you're like, gosh, I really think that for me, it was flagged as AI, it has this other stuff, there's tone difference, there's other things going on, that there's everything that they talk about is not stuff we talked about in class. Some of those other flags, you can articulate that and say, hey, student, I understand you're telling me X, Y, Z. This is the evidence that I'm using to say that I think it's more likely than not that you violated the course policy. And if you disagree with me, like that's totally fine. That's your right. You can appeal to the Academic Integrity Hearing Board. That's a panel of people. I would love for a panel of people with, different minds to bounce ideas off of each other to say, yeah, Karen, we looked at your decision and we don't think it's right. And this is why. Cool. Then I can learn from that too. And so the same thing kind of applies with faculty in whether if you're reporting to our office, but you feel like you're on the fence, be okay with the appeals process. And for a student going through, use that appeals process. That's what it's there for. I'm not sure if that answers the original question exactly, but that's kind of my approach or what I would think or some conclusions I would draw based on the question.
Any other questions or comments? Examples? I will say, when I first started trying to understand how or if or when I should use generative AI with my students, one of the places I looked for guidance was my professional society. Because I was thinking, my particular professional society has guidelines. I'm a biochemist by training, but it has guidelines for, what the learning outcomes should be for biochemistry and molecular biology majors. So, when we're doing curriculum alignment, I often go there to make sure that I'm aligning with what the rest of the country is doing within my discipline. And so going to my society to see how they're thinking about the use of AI is useful. And so you might consider tapping into your disciplinary homes for additional ideas for how to use it in the classroom, particularly as it aligns with students' future careers and where they're going and the likelihood that they might need to actually know how to use these technologies.
I think something to add on to that too is it was alluded to and mentioned earlier that the expectations for different classes can be different, and that's a lot for our students to manage and navigate. Even before artificial intelligence was a thing, expectations were different from course to course, and there's a lot of cultural implications with academic integrity and the way that teaching occurs across the world. And so if you Gosh, I just totally lost my train of thought. I apologize. I'm sorry, Erica, you were talking about professional organizations and subject area specialties. And so there are organizations that have come out and to say, we won't allow, ChatGPT generated language in our published articles or in this space or in that space. And, the difference between math and the fine arts are very different. And so I think that's another area where your specific classroom and your specific subject area expertise becomes super important, because my office or, any general kind of office is not going to know the intimate details of what your field says about artificial intelligence. And so we can't naturally bring that into the conversation in the same way that you might be able to. I'm sorry for losing my thought there and riding with me back in.
No, you're right, Karen. And that was one of the things that came up this summer when we were trying to make some recommendations for the community, and really centering and remembering that our students get different guidance and there are different expectations in every course. And so over communicating to your students what your expectations are related to AI, I think is one of the most important takeaways that you can have from this panel, maybe. I know Erin Gordon was on here. I don't know if she still is. But Erin also pointed out that students may not actually be able to distinguish sometimes, perhaps some of these tools that they've been using for a while, they may not be able to distinguish them from some of the tools that are like generative artificial intelligence. So for example, many of our students use Grammarly, and that may be a tool that you embrace for them to use. But they may not know that Grammarly is really all that different from another sort of technological tool that they're using. So I think clearly defining what generative artificial intelligence is, the degree to which you'll let them use it, and revisiting it for every assignment, because they will forget after what they call syllabus week, what the expectations are. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
I'll pop in again here. What I think would be really neat, maybe not realistic, would be if just realizing this is so new, it changes day to day. There's new tools, there's new abilities, and just realizing like you're not going to get ahead of it from now. Maybe a few years from now, you could get all of it under the hood and really understand all of it really well and have a good idea of what it's capable of. So just forgiving yourself for that, and not being afraid to like overshow your hand, like talking about it in your class. I know that I feel this as I volunteer my time as a panelist. Like, am I stepping too far out of my expertise? Am I saying things that I don't yet know enough about? I don't think there's a huge risk of revealing to students, or I'd like for there not to be a huge risk of revealing to students, here's how much you've used it, here's where you think it could be okay. It has serious drawbacks. It runs off of bias. You like, it's a really interesting tool, but it can't be the only thing you use, and here are the dangers of using it. And then just finishing up that thought, if we manage to make it feel like they're getting a better service or a better teaching experience because of the processes that we use to keep them honest, like that's the thing that I think is like, would just be neat. So maybe you ask them to do that writing assignment, and then you schedule an appointment, already impossible for a lot of classes, I know, where you ask them about their content and tell me about it in real time. Where'd you get this idea? What was motivating about it? Or you could put screws to them and make it very technical. So that would be something that I think could be like a learning moment for everybody, and they don't feel like they're being put in, a jail cell because of the possibility that they may have cheated.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that. One of the things that in conversations with colleagues, I think that one of the things to consider when we're, trying to decide what is okay and what's not okay, especially if we're leaning on the side of, using it at all is cheating and not okay. Uh, to me, it's really daunting to create a class environment where we're trying to catch cheaters, and the adversarial nature that creates between faculty and students. And so I think that that's just something to also keep in mind. The more I've kind of played with it, and because I teach introductory courses, the the writing that I get that's not AI generated is usually on a pretty low bar and has a lot of improvement to make. And that's part of the point of our writing assignments, is to let them start where they are and to improve. And so part of my decision about, I don't want to fight it. I want to use it and be clear about what's appropriate and not appropriate, because part of my reasoning is I don't want to have that adversarial relationship with my students, and I don't want to create that vibe of, if you're going to cheat, I'm going to catch you, right? So I think that is something to consider, and I'm not sure that I can catch students. If ChatGPT gives me something bland, well, that's no different than what I might expect of anyway, and so, yeah, I just toss that out there too, about what the ramifications are for the tone of the class based on decisions that we make.
We're about 4 minutes until the hour, and I know that it's a long day, close to the beginning of the semester. Are there any final thoughts or questions that we can field for you? Well, like Harrison pointed out, this is the technology is evolving faster than we can keep up with it. And so you'll notice throughout the coming months that there will be additional sessions where we can pull faculty together to talk about generative AI. For example, the next one that's coming up, opportunity, will be at TChex. There's sessions on generative AI there. And the TCI will be trying to be responsive to how things evolve and hold more sessions for folks as well. And potentially also members of the Teaching Academy. I've asked Joy Egbert, who, golly, she's just a fountain of knowledge. So keep your eyes peeled for those in Insider. Yeah, I don't think old-fashioned plagiarism is going to go away either. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. And you now know that Karen is a great resource, and your colleagues around campus are too. So please utilize your colleagues as moving forward. Have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you at the next pit stop.
Hey, Erica.